Well, hello everyone and welcome to Race Week. And today we are going to review a fairly dramatic Indianapolis 500 that took place yesterday. It wasn't a normal Indy 500. We had to wait a lot longer than usual. The race was postponed to August and we had to wait a while for it. Unfortunately, spectators could not be admitted, which did take away a lot of the usual Indianapolis 500 atmosphere that we usually have. But we were treated to, despite a little bit of an anticlimactic finish, we were treated to an exciting race. So, without further ado, let's go in to the race report. The race got underway, as I mentioned in the previous show, it was Marco Andretti who got pole position for the Indianapolis 500, but that means no guarantee of victory. And the race got underway. Scott Dixon in second place on the first row immediately made his move. It looks like Andretti had got a really good launch, a really good start, because it was a rolling start obviously, but Dixon was able to get into the slipstream and was able to take the lead from the Andretti driver. And Andretti did seem to lack race pace, and you can see here is Takuma Sato managing to get past him as well. Marco Andretti did not seem to have as good as a race pace as he had. Not everyone made it through the first lap unscathed. There was contact between Ed Carpenter and Zach Veach. There was no yellow needed for that, and he was able to bring his car into the pits, and there was no debris on the track, but he was put several laps down as a result of the incident. Then Ryan Hunter-Reay, the fourth car in your picture, he was making up ground. He first managed to get past Marco Andretti, and then he managed to get past Takuma Sato and started putting pressure on Scott Dixon. The first yellow came out on lap 6 as James Davison had a wheel failure. They're not actually sure what happened, but his wheel literally exploded and was on fire, and he was out of the race. There was not only the parked car to deal with, but there was a lot of debris on the track, which obviously meant we had our first of many cautions in the race. There was a lot of them. The race got back underway, and at this point, Hunter-Reay seemed happy to stay in Dixon's draft to save fuel, but it wasn't long before the yellow was out again, as Marcus Ericsson, who did have high hopes going into this race and show a lot of promise during this month, he hit the wall, and that brought out the yellow. And that meant all the front runners pitted. But this actually turned it into basically two races, because there were a whole bunch of cars, which included the Penske drivers of Newgarden, Pagenaud and Power, who pitted in the first round under the first caution, put them in front, which meant there were kind of two races, and we weren't sure which one was the race for the lead. But the race got back underway, and then everyone did pit. All the people who pitted the first time did pit, and then that put Dixon back out in front. That put Scott Dixon back out in front, but then you had... And Scott Dixon was in real command, but there was drama for both of Also, there was drama for both of Dixon's closest challengers. Alexander Rossi had a weird incident where he was called into the pits very late and he couldn't get in time. Apparently, then we found that was because of issues in his pit box where the electronic stuff was overheating. It was a very hot August day, so quite a lot hotter than an Indy 500 typically is. and Rinus VeeKay had a botched pit stop where he made contact with his pit crew. Thankfully, no one was hurt, and he stalled on pit exit. He then had a stop-go penalty, and that was that as far as his winning chances went. It was a shame because he was looking like he could actually feature in the race. And then you had the next caution. Dalton Kellett hit the wall. Rookie driver, driving for the Junkos team, I believe. He hit the wall. I believe it was the Junkos team. I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he went into the wall after an overtaking attempt on Ben Hanley. But he understeered into the wall with a lack of air. Those who pitted under the second caution did come in on that lap, but then all the others who pitted in the first caution, they lost their advantage because of this caution. They had to come in, which basically equalised the strategies. Then we had the restart, or not, because there was a massive crash. Connor Daly appeared to get caught out on the restart and lose it, and in avoidance, as there are a few cars that broke in front, Oliver Askew speared at high speed into the wall and appeared to have hurt himself a little bit, but eventually he was fine. He probably just had the wind knocked out of him, which wasn't surprising considering how big an impact it was. He appeared to have maybe banged his knees a bit. He got out of the car, but he was struggling with his legs. But in the end, both were okay. Both drivers were okay. Then we had the restart, and Alexander Rossi was immediately on the move, getting past Takuma Sato. And then he set about catching Dixon. Pato O'Ward actually then followed through. And then both Dixon and Rossi seemed to be happy to be switching the lead around in order to save fuel. So lap after lap, they kept switching the lead, basically actually kind of helping each other. But they obviously were not going to help each other towards the end of the race, but that was the only way that they could get adequate fuel mileage. No one seemed to want to lead the race at this point. So they were just letting each other go. But then Rossi's race then took a massive knock after an unsafe release from his box into Takuma Sato. And to add insult to injury, he was told to go to the back of the field as a penalty for that incident. But then Alexander Rossi was on the move on the restart, managing to pass a whole bunch of cars at once. He was a man on a mission after a kind of a slow up after Simon Pagenaud hit the back of Ryan Hunter-Reay. This who had really dropped back in the pit stop sequences. This could really have been a nasty accident had it had been Pagenaud's tyre that hit Hunter-Reay's tyre rather than the front of his car. Damaged Pagenaud's front wing, but then Alexander Rossi hit the wall, and then that brought out the next caution of the race. I believe this was his first Indy 500 retirement. He was desperate to get up the order, but then he lost it going into turn 2 and hit the wall. On the restart here, you're on board with Fernando Alonso, who had a difficult race. He did actually show signs of being able to feature in the race. He struggled with the balance at first. Then he was happy with the car, but then his clutch failed, which meant that his remaining pit stops, they had to do the old-fashioned push start. That lost him a lap, and he was out of contention for any kind of useful results. But Dixon held the lead, but then Sato retook it from the Chip Ganassi driver, and they showed signs of wanting to swap the lead, but then they both pitted. Sato pitted first, and then Dixon came in. Dixon pitted in. He had a slight hesitation in his stop, but still came out in front. But that hesitation could have proved costly. Sato was quickly able to catch and pass him. For the remainder of the race, I think Dixon was simply just biding his time and was waiting to the end of the race to make his move. Because to make his move at a time where he cannot respond. Because being in the lead was not favourable, and if that was the case, I can see why being in the lead was seen as not an ideal position with around 10 laps to go, or even on the penultimate lap. But Dixon's hopes were dashed after an absolutely monumental crash for Spencer Pigot. He tapped the outside wall on the exit of the final corner, and then he speared into the pit attenuator. Thank God that that tyre wall was there, because it could be said that that could easily have saved his life. It was an absolutely colossal impact. I mean, you can hear the sound, the sheer sound of the impact. It wasn't just an impact sound, it was like a massive bang. But somehow he escaped. I mean, he was told to lie down at the side of the track whilst they did tests and sent to hospital for an evaluation. But he was discharged with no injuries. And that was an incredibly relieving sight to see Spencer Pigot do that tweet on Twitter around a few hours after the race to say that he was okay. And good job from NBC as well, who obviously are the broadcasters, who are IndyCar broadcasters. Good job of them not to cut to a shot of his car until he could clearly be seen moving around, so there was no worry about whether he was okay or not. So it was fair play to NBC on that. But this meant that the race, there was a bit of controversy, but the reason that the race did not finish, there was no red flag, is what would the point have been? Only 3 laps to go. The attenuator was destroyed. It would have taken, they say it would have taken an hour to fix the attenuator. And then that would have caused a lot of problems broadcast-wise just for 3 laps of action. And perhaps if it was midway through the race, they would have obviously red flagged it, but 3 laps from the end, there was no point. And then that meant that Takuma Sato crossed the line in formation with Dixon and Newgott and Rahal, I believe that is. Yeah, it's Rahal. With Dixon and Rahal winning the race, taking his second Indy 500 win. He's becoming a really popular IndyCar driver now. When he was in F1, he was one of F1's most popular underdogs, but he's becoming a really popular driver stateside now, and now to all IndyCar fans as well. Takuma Sato, he is showing himself to be has shown himself since joining IndyCar to be a very handy driver. And he deserved the win. You had to feel a bit for Scott Dixon, but it has to be said, he did show why many see him as one of the best drivers ever not to have made F1, and people even see him on the level of the likes of Hamilton, F1 greats such as Hamilton, Schumacher and Senna. With the way that he was dominating that race. I mean, although he didn't win, he did show himself to be an incredible driver. Graham Rahal finished in 3rd. He drove a good race to work his way up the order and finish in 3rd. Santino Ferrucci finished in 4th place in the Dale Coyne car. Then you had Joseph Newgarden, who looked like he was in the fight to win, but he did fade a bit towards the end. Then you had Pato O'Ward, who also was looking like he could win. I mean, he believed he could win the race, but in the end he did fade as well. Then you had James Hinchcliffe, who was always running around the top 10 area, but you didn't really see much of him in the race. And you had Colton Herta, he had a very quiet race, and he had Jack Harvey and then Ryan Hunter-Reay, who was running up front at first, but then he dropped back in the pit sequence. And then you had Helio Castroneves finishing 11th on the alternate strategy. Then you had Felix Rosenqvist, Marco Andretti. He would have been very disappointed with 13th after getting pole position. Then you had Will Power, Zach Veach, J.R. Hildebrand, Max Chilton, Charlie Kimball, Tony Kanaan, I said in the preview that it was his last Indy 500, but he said he wants to do another Indy 500 with the fans. So he is going to be doing... So, good chance we could see him featuring in next year's Indy 500. Then you had Rinus VeeKay. Can't help but feel, but Rinus VeeKay could have contended to win the whole thing, had it not been for his pit stop dramas. Then you had Fernando Alonso. I obviously mentioned his issues earlier. It was a real shame. A lot of people were viewing the race probably for him, and it would have been nice to see him feature a bit more in the race. Could have gotten the series more exposure. It would have been nice to see, but obviously his clutch issues put pay to that. But he got to finish the race, which he was proud of. It's going to be his last Indy 500 till 2023 at earliest, because he is not going to be allowed to do it whilst he is driving for Renault. Then you had Simon Pagenaud in 22nd after his front wing issue, his collision with Hunter Ray. Then you have Ben Hanley and Sage Karam, who were kind of lapped a lot of the time in the race. Spencer Pigot was classified 25th, actually ahead of Ed Carpenter, who I believe was running at the finish, but his first lap incident put him many laps down, which meant that he was actually classified behind Pigot in the end. Then you had Rossi, Alex Palou, forgot to mention that he caused one of the cautions as well after crashing out. Real shame for him it was. He was running in the top 10 for pretty much the whole race until he crashed out. So it was a real shame to see him out of the race, but he showed himself to be perfectly capable of the challenge of ovals. Then obviously Conor Daly and Oliver Askew, who retired. Then we obviously lost Keller, Ericsson and Davison early on in the race. So that is the Indianapolis 500. And we had to wait a while, but we were treated to quite an exciting race. But it has to be said, there were a lot of big accidents in the race, and I've been wondering why that was, but a lot of people are saying that the reason that there being a lot of crashes in this race was not really surprising, considering the hotter temperatures and the tyres overheating. But thankfully, everyone who did have a sizable crash did go out okay. I do think something should be done, because attenuators like that have posed risks in the past, because it's not just Indianapolis that has an attenuator like that. I'm thinking, I believe Bahrain has one, Monza has one, and actually there were a lot of concerns from viewers that one day earlier in the race that there was going to be a monumental crash at some point. And there was. I mean, perhaps the best way of going around it is maybe kind of like Baku or Interlagos have, where the actual attenuator is quite... I mean, they have room for quite a wide attenuator, which means that if, for example, a worst case scenario, so you have a side impact into a thin wall, it can still at least be the deformable structures that hit it first rather than the survival cell. But that's quite hard to do in that particular instance. So maybe for Indianapolis, for tracks such as Monza and Bahrain, that's a little bit more tricky. But maybe at Indianapolis, the pit entry should be earlier, should be turning that, because there is a service road on the entrance to turn 4, which has been used as a pit entrance in some other series. Maybe that could be used, and the wall could be extended back there, where cars are less likely to hit. But thankfully, Pigot came out okay from that crash. And of course, we have to discuss the top drivers. Takuma Sato, as I said, he has been during his time in Formula One, he was a very popular underdog in Formula One, and since joining IndyCar, all the time he's had a genuine chance of winning races, and all his wins has been fairly popular. And him winning the 500 for a second time has gone down very well internationally. And as I said, we need to talk about Scott Dixon as well, because never have we seen anyone dominate a 500 the way that he had until those cautions put other cars into range. And obviously the final yellow at the end prevented him from challenging to win. But he has proved, I believe that he is up there with the likes of Hamilton, Schumacher and Senna as a great driver. If he was in F1, he'd be a multiple world champion. And his form in IndyCar in recent years shows that. He is definitely worthy of that sort of title. But anyway, that is it for the Indianapolis 500 review. Obviously, be sure to join us on Thursday for the midweek recap, where we will preview this weekend's Belgian Grand Prix and go through the latest news. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on Thursday. Goodbye.